You know, for as long as we've looked up at the stars, we've thought we were the main characters. Turns out we were so wrong. What you're about to see, it's not a story, it's not a legend. This is a recovered archive, a piece of a history that someone tried very hard to bury. Think of this as the opening chapter to a war that's been fought in the shadows for longer than we can possibly imagine.
So, what we have here is just a fragment, really. A whisper from an age so old it feels like it never happened. But it did. And it tells a story, a saga of how a universe was born, a war of concepts, and a tragedy that's had ripple effects we're only now starting to see. All right, let's dive in.
40 million years. Just try to wrap your head around that number. It's almost impossible, right? And that's where this record starts. Not with some grand explosion, but with the very last embers of a world that was already dead. The last spark of life. Just these tiny microscopic organisms carrying the first consciousness, floating through the absolute nothingness of space on a rock, just looking for a place to land.
And this is where things get truly wild. Look at the scale here. You've got life starting as this microscopic thing, just sleeping inside a lonely piece of rock floating through space, and from that, you get these colossal beings, these dragonites, so massive and powerful that their feelings could literally terraform a planet. That jump, from the tiniest speck to something that can build worlds, that's really the heart of this whole lost record.
Okay, so our first section of the archive, it's all about the birth of this new world. And it was a beginning of incredible beauty. But as we'll see, that very beauty is what gave birth to something truly, truly awful.
So, in the very beginning, everything was perfect. Harmony. Can you imagine a world where the concept of fear doesn't even exist? It's not that they weren't afraid, it's that there was nothing to be afraid of. Everything just worked in this perfect rhythm. Even darkness wasn't scary, it was just, the quiet shade cast by the light. A place to rest.
But of course, perfection like that, it never lasts, does it? The records talk about a single soul, something that got left out, pushed to the edges of all this perfection. And in that isolation, that festering loneliness, it started to change. It got twisted. And this is key. Evil didn't come from the outside. It was a sickness that grew right from the heart of this perfect world.
And this twisted thing eventually became a being that the archive just calls addiction. A huge, colossal dragonite. Imagine an evil that's not born of hate, but born purely from loneliness. It was the living emotion of fear itself. And its only drive, its only purpose, wasn't to destroy, it was to consume. To fill that emptiness, to make sure it would never, ever be alone again. So, as you can imagine, the arrival of this thing kicked off a war that shaped everything for thousands of years. But here's the kicker. It didn't end with a heroic victory. It ended with a mistake. A truly tragic mistake that would send ripples down through all of history.
The archive calls it the Great Aragonite Event. You have addiction just bursting out from the planet's core, setting the whole world on fire. It's chaos. So the planet itself, its consciousness, fights back. It creates 4 of its own champions, elemental dragonites, one of stone, one of ice, light, and wind. And for thousands of years, it's just this clash of titans, 5 gods battling it out, carving mountains, boiling oceans. It's unimaginable. And finally, they managed to overpower addiction and shove it back down into the dark caves of the planet.
But a war like that, it leaves scars, deep ones. One of the heroes, Draco, found himself completely alone after it was all over. And he was terrified of that same crushing loneliness that created addiction in the first place. So he made a deal, a pact. He gave up everything, his power, his godlike form, for one thing, the ability to create others, so he would never be alone.
And this is where the story becomes a true tragedy. It's just the most terrible irony. The very people he created to fix his loneliness, these humanoids, they developed this need for fire. And all the smoke from their fires, their industries, their wars, it didn't just disappear. It trickled down deep into the mountain, right to where addiction was trapped. Every bit of smog, every extinguished soul was like a meal for the beast. Without even knowing it, Draco had built the perfect feeding machine for the very monster he'd fought to imprison. All right, prepare for a jump. The archive suddenly shifts gears here. We're leaping forward in time, away from the cosmic myths, to see what happened much, much later.
We're about to see the long-term fallout from Draco's decision and how it leads to a very different and very modern kind of threat.
So this next bit reads like an old field note from an anthropologist. It seems that after the Great War, things got pretty chaotic. Survival meant you had to adapt, and fast. This note talks about one group of humanoids that just opted out of the whole conflict. They evolved into these tree-like creatures. I mean, their skin literally hardened into bark, their toes grew into roots. They basically just retreated from all the fire and chaos and became part of the quiet earth.
And then we get this. It's a file, and it is absolutely chilling. It's about a lure, a weapon, something called the special sauce, used by these things called skeletons to snatch children. The file breaks down the composition, psychotropic agents, festering hate, adrenal accelerants. I mean, it's designed with this cold, precise malice to paralyze a kid's will. It's a whole different kind of evil from the raw, cosmic fury we saw before.
Here's another one of those field notes. A different group, a different escape plan. To get away from the constant war on the surface, they went down, deep into the oceans. Their bodies changed, their rib cages became flexible for the pressure, their whole form elongated. They became the first whales. But the archive points out that if you look closely, you can still see the ghost of their humanoid skeleton inside. A little reminder of what they used to be, what they had to give up.
And just like that, bang, we're snapped right back to the immediate threat. All that history, 40 million years of it, all the evolution, it all comes crashing down to this one horrifying fact. A case file. A child named Levi. He's gone. Abducted. Suddenly, this isn't ancient history anymore. It's real, it's happening now, and it's personal.
Okay, so the archive's focus swings back again. We're going back to Draco, our tragic hero. He's just drowning in guilt over what he's done, right? His solution made everything worse. So he sets off on one last desperate journey to find some kind of answer. And it's here, in his absolute darkest moment, that the record shows us the first little spark of hope. He travels for seasons, just walking and walking. He finally reaches the place where his Dragonite brothers are supposed to be. And they're there, but they've turned to stone. They're not dead, they're just so immense, so ancient, that they're living on a timescale he can't even perceive anymore. The despair in the record here is just thick. You can feel it. He was a god. He gave it up to be mortal, and now he's like an ant standing at the feet of these mountains that used to be his family. He's completely powerless. And right then, when he's at rock bottom, something appears, a guide. The record calls it an invisible spirit mist, and it leads him. It takes him on this spiritual journey, down into this mystical pool, pulling him deeper and deeper into the earth, until he enters a cave, a cavern filled with these massive, pulsing, purple dilithium crystals. And this is it. This is the moment the whole 40-million-year story pivots. He looks into the reflections in these crystals, and he sees a vision. Not the past, the future. He sees his son, a hero, rising from the flames. He sees his warrior daughters right there beside him, and he realizes his legacy isn't failure, it's them. He didn't just create a problem, he created the heroes who would one day fight it. That vision, it was everything. It gave him the strength he needed to go back. He finds his partner, Fee, and for the first time in what must have felt like an eternity, there's harmony again. There's love. It's this beautiful, shared moment that finally brings balance back into his life. And from that union, his son, the prince from the vision, is born. It's the emotional peak of the whole archive, really, going from total solitude back to being whole.
And get this is really fascinating. The archive hints at some kind of psychic link between Draco and his son, a connection that crosses time and space. At the exact moment Draco is seeing this vision of hope in the crystal cave, his son, the prince, is going through his own trial, locked away in some dark prison cell. But the record says they both heard the same prophetic voice, the same message of hope. Like their struggles were connected through this invisible bond.
And that brings us to the end of the declassified record. The scholar who put all this together leaves us with one final thought, one big thesis statement to sum up the entire conflict.
So, when you boil it all down, the real threat, it was never just the monster. It's the cycle. See, addiction isn't something you can just go out and kill with a sword. It's a self-sustaining system, a system that literally feeds on hopelessness and despair. And the most tragic part? It's being served, completely by accident, by the children of the very hero who tried to stop it. All of this,
has just been the 40-million-year prologue. And so the archive leaves us with a pretty heavy question. How in the world do you break a cycle that's been running for that long?